Hello, hi everyone. Thank you for this really kind introduction, Christian. I also appreciate the choice of color. The official color of the Hungarian governing party, Viktor Orbán's party, is orange. So I feel that whatever I will say about the government, it will be balanced. So I'll be fine. So thanks for that. But what I really wanted to start with was that I know that there are all kinds of historical reasons, and there is this rivalry between Hungary and Romania. So I have to be careful with what I say here. But you seem like a friendly, kind audience, so I will do it anyway. That I think we Hungarians, we always felt that we are at the center of the universe, and I think the last 16 years have proved that. We have a prime minister, Viktor Orbán, who has become a household name around the world, and he has drawn much more attention to our little country. Actually, it's more than 9 million, for the record, but not much more than we ever thought it would happen. And he was kind enough to share that spotlight with us journalists as well, because since he has become, this kind of pioneer in turning a more or less democratic country into an autocratic regime or hybrid regime, or you can pick your, definition. And he carried out a crackdown on independent media. Then us Hungarian journalists have also become interesting for the outside world. So it means that in the last decade or so, we've been approached countless times to talk about our experience. I personally was invited to several discussions about the decline of press freedom and democratic institutions, and these were like mostly interesting. But what I liked the most was that it's also I could see how different people in different parts of the world approach these issues in a different way. So one of the first such gatherings took place in a nice Italian town about a decade ago. And the main topic was how to save independent journalism and public debate in general. And most of the participants were from Western Europe. And I remember that at the beginning of the gathering, there was a guy who really looked like a proper intellectual, and he stood up and he said that, well, it's important to talk about saving public debate, but it's even more important to talk about what public debate is at all. And, that was the moment where I needed strong coffee, because I don't know how I would stay awake, during a discussion like that. And as you can imagine, we didn't really accomplish much during that discussion. We didn't really save independent journalism, and I still have no idea what public debate is. Then last year I spent quite a lot of time talking with colleagues in the United States, because as you know, they freaked out quite a lot about the return of Donald Trump, as this crackdown on journalists and basically anybody else who is standing in his way. And if you know Americans, you know that they wouldn't really spend a lot of time on definition of public debate, and they are much more hands-on, much more pragmatic, much more practical. So they are more like, they have this approach: let's cut to the chase, let's fix the problem. They think that if you throw enough money, time, and other resources at the problem, then you will find a solution. And I wouldn't underestimate our American friends, because I think they are truly really hardworking, and they are actually good at innovation. And just because during some of that innovation they come up with things that can blow up the world or break our societies, I wouldn't be hard on them. Nobody's perfect. But so over the years, I got to know both the Western European and the American approach, but there is an Eastern European way. And then most of you in the room know that the most important component of this approach is that you go to a bar and you order some drinks. In the good old days, it also included smoking a million cigarettes and getting totally wasted, but Unfortunately, these things are out of fashion now. So, but I'm in my expert opinion, this is the most effective approach, and I have proof for that because the Direct 36, the organization I run in Budapest, this investigative journalism center, was born during discussions over drinks, beers, and other kinds of drinks. It was the summer of 2014, and I was without a job. I had just resigned from Origo, this one of the most popular news websites sites at the time in Hungary. After the editor-in-chief, my colleague Gergő Sáling, had been forced out of his job because of a story and investigation that I was pursuing into the shady activities of one of the most powerful government ministers. It was the fourth year of the Orbán regime, and the crackdown on independent media had been well underway. And in the first couple of years, they focused on taking over the public media, public broadcasters, radio, TV, news agency. But once they were done with that, then they turned towards private media companies as well. And as it happened, Origo, this news site, was one of the first targets. Even though it had been a good place to do journalism for many years, I spent the first more than 10 years of my career there. You know, the publisher of the site and even the management of the owners, which was a multinational telecommunications company, they were always supportive with our work. But once the Orbán government started this crackdown, they started to put pressure on the owner, the telecommunications company. Then the management's approach changed. They were telling us not to pursue certain stories. And when we pushed back, then the pressure became even stronger. And then that's what led to the removal of the editor-in-chief of the site. For us, it was clear that if we wanted to continue doing journalism the same way that he had been doing before, then we had to do it on our own. Because if we had gone to another media company owned by another corporation, then we would have ended up in a pretty similar situation. So the conversations we had over those drinks centered on the question of how we can create an organization that would be resilient against these kind of pressures, and that somehow even can serve as a counterbalance against this crackdown that was already happening in Hungary. Basically, the question we were asking, like, how can we serve the public with hard-hitting but fair journalism under circumstances like this? And we made a few key decisions at the time. One was on the organizational side, that we decided to set up a non-profit outlet. It was also, we didn't really have a choice. We didn't look for investors because there were not too many wealthy people interested in a politically risky project in the first place. But we also, our lesson from Origo was that the political pressure comes through the business side, through the owner, through the advertisements, the advertisement deals, the sponsorships, whatever. So we wanted to avoid that. Our problem was that we didn't have money. So what we did was we managed to secure grants from some bigger foundations, international foundations, but we also knew that won't be like a sustainable, a long-term strategy to rely on a few donors. So we, at the very beginning, started a crowdfunding. That's how we called it back then. So basically, we started a membership campaign so that we can rely on the audience, and that was our goal, to develop that into the largest revenue stream for our organization. The other key decision had to do with the editorial side. We decided to focus on investigative journalism. That was also partly because that was out of necessity, because we didn't have enough money, enough funds to start a 24/7 news organization. But we also thought that even back then, that there would be a special need for investigative journalism, partly because of the crackdown that was already happening from the government, but also because, I'm sure we talked about this a lot in previous conferences, that, the business model of the media collapsed, and even the remaining independent outlets didn't have resources to do this kind of time-consuming and risky journalism. And it was also my personal ambition. I had already been gravitating towards investigative journalism for years. I had just come back from the fellowship in the US, during which I worked at the investigative unit of the Washington Post, and I was really, I couldn't wait to implement all that I learned there and implement that in Hungary. And now, Direct 36 has been around for more than 11 years, and our whole story has been about punching above our weight. We exposed some of the shadiest parts of Viktor Orbán's relationship with Vladimir Putin, or we were part of many of the biggest global investigative journalism projects, such as the Panama Papers. In another big cross-border investigation, we learned that 2 of our reporters were surveilled with the Pegasus spyware, which was operated by the Hungarian secret services. And I think I'm also really proud of our project, in which we exposed the threat, the deadly threat that the hospital infections pose for patients, and that investigation prompted the healthcare services to act, and I think that contributed to saving lives. And we also managed to achieve our goal to sustain our operations with the help of our audience. So the vast majority of our funding is coming from the public now. As you can gather, I'm pretty proud of Direct 36 and our organization, but I would also like to talk a little bit about the environment we are operating in, because that has got worse and worse over the years. Oh, sorry. Okay. Okay. Thanks. Because what happened with us when we had to leave Origo, our previous workplace, that became a pattern. As the government's crackdown on independent media continued, more and more formerly independent outlets have been captured by friends and allies of Viktor Orbán. Some of these captured outlets were just shut down. That's what happened with Népszabadság, which was the print newspaper with the largest circulation in Hungary, and that was just shut down from one day to the other, while others were transformed into propaganda outlets. Origo, my old workplace, was one of these. Now it's totally unrecognizable, that it's spreading some of the ugliest propaganda pieces in Hungary, and for some reason they also publish a lot of soft porn content, because I guess that's how they want to have clicks. Now you understand why I don't use slides. But this propaganda machinery is kind of unique, I think, at least in the EU or the so-called democratic world, and I think it's unique for 2 reasons. One is just simply the size of the propaganda machinery. We are not talking about like there are a few outlets that are leaning towards Orbán or sympathizing with the government. They built a whole ecosystem, an ecosystem with hundreds of newspapers, news sites, television channels, news agency, almost all radio stations in the country, and literally all local newspapers in the country. But it's not only the size, it's also the way it works. It's just pushing out the government's messages. They are attacking the critics of the government, often journalists, and there is no autonomy in the system. The staff of, I don't really call them journalists, because what they do is not journalism. They get directions often directly from the government. That's something we reported on. And this propaganda is still powerful and was powerful, but what the government failed to take into account was the resilience of Hungarian independent journalists. because we were not the only ones who struck out on our own. Journalists from other captured outlets also set up new organizations. They also relied on their audience to raise money. They innovated. Telex, a popular news site, which is our publishing partner, as well, was launched almost 6 years ago by the former staff of Index, which was at the time the most popular news website in Hungary, when it was taken under pro-government control. There's Partisan, which is a YouTube-based outlet, and this basically stepped into the vacuum that was created by the public, the state, the broadcasters, when they turned into North Korean-style mouthpieces for the government. And even some conservative journalists who used to be supporters of Viktor Orbán and his party, some of them decided that they didn't want to be part of the propaganda machinery, and they set up their own organizations, and they do pretty much the same. They also raise money through their readers, and they publish some of the most hard-hitting stories on the government. Most of these outlets were launched in the digital space because that was the least controlled by the government. And luckily enough, the audience moved there as well. And that was also a space, and that's still a space, which is great for experimentation. A few years ago, we had a lot of internal discussions at Direct 36 about how we can grow if we have the possibility to do that. And I always thought that if you have an organization with limited resources, you can grow in two directions. One is you can grow like horizontally, which in our case would have meant that you publish more frequently, not just, we don't cover daily news, so we publish 1 or 2 stories a month, maybe, sometimes even less. But you would publish more. Maybe you are hiring more reporters in other cities or even outside Hungary. So you increase the frequency of the stories. This could lead to a more like a quantitative growth. The other way is vertical, and in that case, the idea is that you don't want to publish more stories, but instead you go even deeper, and you spend even more time and resources on reporting and crafting just one story or just a couple of stories. But of course, at the end of the process, you want to come up with something that is so shiny and it's so interesting and so cool that basically people cannot avoid looking at it. That's more like a growth in quality. So we chose this second approach, that we felt that this was more, a better fit for Direct 36. And that's how we started working on documentaries that Christian also mentioned in the introduction. We had close to zero filmmaking experience or skills, but we were confident in our abilities to find stories and tell stories. So we teamed up with independent filmmakers and started producing documentaries. This is where I must warn you, don't try this at home. Making a film is an extremely stressful and painful experience. My popularity index inside my family goes down every time we are making a film. And I apologize to my wife who is here, and to my kids, and to everyone in the family. But it comes with a reward. Films can deliver results that almost nothing else can in journalism. We made our second film, as also mentioned, about the business empire built by Viktor Orbán's family. Its title is The Dynasty, and it was released on YouTube in February 2025, last year. It has become a blockbuster. It was viewed more than 1 million times in less than a little bit more than a day. Now it has more than 4 million views, and most of it came from inside Hungary. But I don't want to So it's a huge success. It's something that we haven't even, we didn't expect, we didn't count on. But that's the kind of result that a good story, a powerful story, told in a good way, in a compelling way, can bring. But I don't want to paint like a rosy picture about the Hungarian media scene, because the pressure on independent journalists is still enormous. We are routinely labeled as foreign agents or traitors to our country. Viktor Orbán has compared journalists to bedbugs that should be swept out of the country. Last year, the government even introduced a bill that was called a law on transparency, but in fact it was a Russian-style foreign agent law that would have eliminated most independent outlets, media outlets, and many civil society organizations as well. But when this law came out, then there was an outpouring support from the public for independent media. Most of them showed their support with donations or by sharing our stories and films. And the bill was postponed, but it's still a real threat. Viktor Orbán has said that if he stays in power, then he will finish the job, whatever that means. But I would still say that the Hungarian independent media scene is stronger, healthier, and more vibrant than it was even just a few years ago. So where does this leave us after it happened at the center of the universe? We are, it's probably the understatement of the conference, but we are living in crazy times with constant upheavals, and I think we are all struggling with how we navigate this strange world. For me, one of the best things that I did was that I took up and read a book called Meditations by the Roman Emperor Marcus Aurelius. I know it's kind of a cliche to quote, these ancient texts, but somehow his writings, his daily reflections on life, work, death, he writes a lot about death, are truly refreshing. First of all, it's the opposite of what you get from social media. It teaches you humbleness, for instance. Marcus Aurelius is telling us that it doesn't even make sense seeking being celebrated, because what you do is not going to, the value of what you do is not going to change. It's not going to get bigger or smaller or more or less based on what others think about your work. I know that you all think right now that Marcus Aurelius wouldn't be very successful on LinkedIn these days. Maybe he would get some endorsements for leadership skills, at least. Talking about that, don't check out my social media office, because I haven't fully adopted his teachings yet. And I also understand the irony that I'm standing here and I'm trying to impress you by bragging about our work. So yeah, there is still work to do for me as well. But let's go back to Marcus Aurelius. That's a safer territory. So let's go back to him. He was not a philosopher. He had a more important job. He was leading the Roman Empire, but he was a follower of Stoicism, a Greek philosophical school that became quite popular with Romans as well. And Stoic philosophers argued that the world is organized and designed, directed in a coherent and rational way, and there is a larger force called the Logos that determines every event, including, naturally, our lives as well. Again, some of you might say that it is easier to accept your place in the world if you're the Roman emperor, but I wouldn't dismiss Marcus Aurelius and Stoicism just because of that, because I think they really resonate, or they can resonate in this crazy world. The Stoic philosophers say that we are like dogs that are tied to a wagon, moving wagon, and the dogs can refuse to run along the wagon, but then they will be just dragged by the wagon. So the choice is to run or to be dragged. I know it's not the most hopeful metaphor, but I warned Christian and Alina in our first meeting that it might not be the greatest idea to bring a Hungarian journalist to talk about hope. But in fact, we can find some hope in that metaphor. Dogs are cute, first of all. And if we, these Stoic philosophers are all dead. So I think we can take this metaphor and we can stretch it a little bit, and then we will probably find that we have more power than they would have, than they thought. Because I think the theory stands as, if we look at our world, I think probably maybe many of you also share this feeling that, feel that our lives are shaped by larger forces. And I think that sadly or not, but some of these changes are indeed unstoppable. I don't think, for example, that the technological shifts that disrupted our information environment can be reversed. And maybe shouldn't be reversed. Because was it really that fair and beneficial for society? And in most countries, it was a few corporations that controlled the information ecosystem. Or that we had to rely on the moral and ethical compass of a few editors, whether they, were acted as responsible gatekeepers of information. And the same is true about the larger political context. I believe that the anger and frustration with the old elites, if you want to call them liberal elites, this frustration that drives some of the darker forces of our politics, I think that's also real. When I've read countless pieces about how Orban has dismantled democratic institutions in Hungary, unfortunately, very few pieces ask the more important question, like, why was it so easy for Orban to do that? And I think the answer to that is that people didn't trust those institutions because those institutions hadn't served them well. And that's why it was so easy for Orban to come back and to take down those institutions. And I think that's probably true in many other countries as well. So I think we have no choice. In that sense, the Stoics are right, but to accept these changes. My problem with some of those navel-gazing discussions was also that, we were talking about saving journalism and democracy, but they often felt like nostalgia sessions, longing for the old times instead of trying to figure out how we can stay relevant in the new times. Mark Carney, the Canadian Prime Minister, gave a speech recently that became viral and very famous, in which he said that nostalgia is not a strategy. Just to take another dig at the theme of the conference, hope is not a strategy either. But it doesn't mean that we shouldn't have hope. In fact, if there is one thing I learned while working as a journalist under the Orban regime, was that nothing is set in stone. I don't think it was the Logos, this invisible force, that determined that we would set up a brand new journalism outlet 11 years ago that would expose some of the darkest secrets of the powerful in Hungary, or that we would produce a documentary that, by all available measures, is the most watched documentary film in the country's history. It was the dream and aspiration of a handful of people who did it against the odds, in some cases against challenges in our personal lives. It's something that never really talked about publicly, but when we were working on setting up Direct 36, that wasn't my top priority at all. It wasn't even the second one, because it happened in the same year when we expected our first child with my wife. And it was also the year when my father was suffering and eventually dying of cancer. See, it's like, what you see on social media is like, it never tells the full story of someone's life. There were many reasons I could be part of building something new and work on setting up a new organization. I was lucky to have a wife who supported me in this. And when we had to rely on her salary when she was still, carrying our still unborn child, probably it helped that she's also a journalist and she understood why we were doing what we were doing with my colleagues. She's here, by the way. If you end up talking to a pretty Argentinian with a lot of energy and a big smile, it's going to be her. There's a high chance. It also helped that my parents, my brother, have always stood by me when I was pursuing this crazy career, even though all of them had and have more stable and normal jobs. And of course, I had great co-founder partners with Gergő Sáling and Balázs Veje and countless other colleagues who've been working with us and still working but it would be too long to name all of them. So, even if you're a pessimistic Hungarian journalist working in one of the darkest periods of your country's history, you can still find hope in what you do. Because it doesn't really matter what those Stoic philosophers said. I think we are strong and determined enough. We can move that wagon into a better direction. Thank you.